British MPs trying to avoid a no-deal Brexit next month have cleared a major hurdle by winning a vote to seize control of the parliamentary agenda. They succeeded by 328 to 301 votes to suspend a Commons rule that says only the government can create new laws. It was helped by 21 Tory party rebels who've now had the party whip removed. Following the defeat, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the government will now trigger a motion for a general election. Here's our political editor, Beth Rigby.
The ayes to the right, 328. The noes to the left, 301.
Not a good start, Boris.
Not at all. Losing his first vote as Prime Minister and control of this House, MPs now with a chance to force him to seek another Brexit extension. Mr Johnson clear he'd risk a general election before he'll do that.
And we are going to have to make a choice, Mr Speaker. I don't want an election. The public don't want an election. I don't believe the right honourable gentleman wants an election. But if MPs vote tomorrow to stop negotiations and to compel another pointless delay to Brexit, potentially for years, then that would be the only way to resolve this. And I can confirm that we are tonight tabling a motion under the Fixed Term Parliament Act.
Mr Corbyn says he can have one, but only once he's satisfied no deal is off the table.
There is no consent in this House to leave the European Union without a deal. There is no majority for no deal in the country. He wants to table a motion for a general election. Fine, get the bill through first in order to take no deal off the table.
Ending the day in failure in his first real test as Prime Minister, it hadn't started much better. Rising to the dispatch box for only the second time, this PM saw his majority evaporate before his very eyes. Former Minister Philip Lee crossing the floor to join the Lib Dems.
I wish I might, honourable friend, all the best.
An ambush designed to put the PM on the back foot. He soldiered on, insisting rebel action would badly backfire on Britain.
It would destroy any chance of negotiation for a new deal. It would destroy it. There are no circumstances in which I will ever accept anything like it. I will never surrender the control of our negotiations in the way the leader of the opposition is demanding.
And neither, it seems, would the rebels. Emerging from a morning meeting with the PM, the ringleaders unswayed.
Clark and Milton, were you convinced by the argument?
Ready to lose their jobs if that's what it took. And it did. Chancellor just 6 weeks ago, now booted from his party.
This is not really about what happens to me or what happens to any one of us individually. This is about the national interest now. Because Parliament is being prorogued, we have only one chance now to stop a no-deal exit on the 31st of October, and that is to pass this bill.
Brexit divisions redefining our political tribes. This Conservative now feels he has more in common with the Lib Dems.
One of the reasons that I've done what I've done is because I want to try to defend liberal democracy. And I don't see much liberal democracy here. I see people seizing power and wielding it ruthlessly in a way that is inconsistent with democracy. There is no democratic mandate for a no-deal Brexit. They did not campaign for a no-deal Brexit. So don't do it then unless you can get the explicit consent. But you want to reverse the result of the referendum? No, I want the explicit informed consent of the British public to what is happening.
Boris Johnson won the keys to number 10 with his searing rhetoric and his relentless optimism about being the guy who could deliver Brexit by October the 31st. But like his predecessor Theresa May, now he's coming crashing back down to earth as the reality of his predicament hits hard. Parliament are mobilising against him and the people here are too. He doesn't speak for them. But what he's doing instead is galvanising his vote leave base in preparation for a Brexit election which will rerun the arguments of the 2016 referendum. The Brexit battle line set between a government determined to leave the EU do or die and a parliament determined to have its say. Mr Johnson knows his only route through is to try to recast his party and his parliament via the ballot box. He might not get the chance. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
So we have the result of the first skirmish between the government and rebel MPs, and it was the rebels who came out on top. But what happens now? Well, later today, they'll control the agenda in Parliament and will try to vote to prevent no deal. But any legislation they bring forward will have to be completed before Parliament is prorogued in the week of the 9th of September. That's next week. The government has indicated it will fight back and table a motion for a general election. Here's Sky's political correspondent Lewis Goodall.
Boris Johnson's first big test in Parliament, his first vote, and he's lost it. With this defeat, he will almost certainly lose control of the order paper, what the Commons does. This new constitutional move means he, as Prime Minister, who should command the Commons, is being commanded by it, but mere bystander. Now, rebel MPs will start the legislative process to compel Boris Johnson to ask for an extension to Article 50. Opposition party leaders, meeting with Jeremy Corbyn today, have been planning their move for days.
There's a real sense of unity that we have across the opposition parties. We're absolutely determined to do everything we can to stop no deal.
Number 10 has suggested that if control of the House is seized, Johnson might give up his and demand an election. But it's no longer in the PM's gift to obtain one. He now has to get authorisation from the Commons under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. So how does that work? 2/3 of MPs need to vote for the motion to trigger an election. That's 434 of them. But with Boris Johnson having lost his working majority, the numbers in the Commons couldn't be tighter. The Tories now have 310 MPs, plus the support of the 10 DUP. So the government needs about half of Labour's 247 MPs to back the motion for there to be an election.
If logically the election is likely to lead to another hung parliament, which I think is very probable, then we are going to continue to be mired in the vicious circle we've got at the moment of not being able to find a way out of the problems that Brexit poses for us. This is why I've argued for having a second referendum.
If he can't get an election in order to keep his promise, Boris Johnson might resort to doing something explosive.
That is that if a bill passes which makes it illegal to leave without a deal, will him and his government abide by the rule of law?
I'm grateful. We will, of course, uphold the Constitution and obey the law.
Listen to his words carefully. The only way he might constitutionally resist something which has become law is to advise the Queen to veto it from becoming law, an ancient privilege not used for centuries, which could explode our Constitution.
What would be unprecedented in the modern era would be for the government to advise against the granting of royal assent for a bill that has been passed by both houses. Royal assent is supposed to be an automatic procedure. It's not supposed to be controversial. If it were to happen in this set of circumstances, it would place the monarch in a very difficult position.
British politics has had some turbulent period since the war, but not really in here. The turbulence was mainly outside. In this chamber, the delicate balance between government and opposition, between the executive and the legislature, between Crown and Commons, all seemed reasonably calm. But not anymore. Now the turbulence is inside. Brexit has thrown all of those delicate balances completely off. Every precedent, every rule is being rewritten.
The government is now trapped. The only way it can escape is the opposition to grant it an election. It will almost certainly fall to a new parliament to take up these benches and solve the Brexit riddle, for the current one has completely failed. Lewis Goodall, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, following that vote, 21 rebel MPs had the whip withdrawn, effectively kicking them out of the party. And earlier, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, had this reaction from Westminster.
Well, Tory MPs knew it was always going to be a bumpy ride with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, but I think few of them expected so many high-profile casualties so early on. Remember, it was only Boris Johnson's second day in the House of Commons as Prime Minister. His first Commons vote, he's lost it by a big margin. 21 rebels, 2 former Chancellors of the Exchequer, Ken Clarke and Philip Hammond, several cabinet ministers, middle-ranking ministers and junior ministers, and Churchill's grandson, Sir Nicholas Soames, who has loyally served Prime Ministers going back to Margaret Thatcher. Many of those MPs, Ken Clarke, for example, served under Margaret Thatcher, John Major, William Hague, David Cameron, Theresa May. Boris Johnson has been ruthless, however. A lot of MPs believe that those tactics have backfired spectacularly by delivering that ultimatum that the rebels would be sacked, not able to fight the general election. He hardened their resolve and indeed did seem to have increased the size of the rebellion. Well, later today, MPs go on to debate the bill to block a no-deal Brexit. Those 21 MPs now, they've got nothing to lose, so they'll be voting against the government again. Mr Johnson says he's bringing forward a motion to bring forward an early general election. Well, Mr Corbyn responded by saying, yes, we'll support you once the bill is passed. So Labour's position is not entirely certain. There are a lot of Labour MPs who agree with Tony Blair that it's a big trap being set by Boris Johnson. But we are in for another pretty tumultuous, if you like, 24, 48 hours later this week. And the Tory party, well, the whole character of the Tory party appears to be changing. It's no longer a broad church. There's no longer room for pro-Europeans, it seems. Critics will say Mr Johnson is turning into another Brexit party. Well, we've gotten used to talking about Mr Corbyn and his left-wing allies trying to purge Labour of elderly, more traditional, if you like, Labour MPs. Well, that hasn't happened yet, but yet in one fell swoop, Mr Johnson has got rid of 21 of his political opponents inside his party. Well, Mr Corbyn, of course, if there is going to be an early election, probably hasn't got time to have all those trigger ballots and get rid of those Labour MPs he wants to get rid of. So Mr Johnson is proving he's more ruthless than Mr Corbyn. But for Labour, of course, they've really got to decide how they approach this, the question of an early general election. A lot of Labour MPs say their primary objective, the priority, is to block a no-deal Brexit. So Labour will say that's what they want to do before they agree to a general election. Also, later today, it's the first Prime Minister's questions for Boris Johnson. Expect a pretty fiery clash between Mr Johnson and Mr Corbyn once again.